Good evening. This is my presentation on interviews for special education for school leaders, EDL 853, Lindsay Sellers. Good evening. This is my presentation on interviews, special education for school leaders, EDL 853, and this is Lindsay Sellers. I put this on here because my interviews were all at the high school level. I interviewed an assistant principal, a teacher in a life skills classroom, and then the para that I talked with was also at the high school level. Child find. How does your child or cooperative approach child find procedures? So each of the people that I interviewed approached this question a little bit differently. The high school administrator talked about how that's done at the high school level through the SIP process, and if that's happened and there's not been any improvement, there's been repeated discipline or possibly a medical condition that's new, then we would look to see what kind of services would maybe need to be in place. The teacher talked more about the earlier interventions with early childhood, with monthly screenings that her cooperative does for ages 3 to 5. And that's for children if their parents or caregivers would see difficulty with anything from hearing and vision to cognitive or maybe even social emotional skills and coping. The paraprofessional, I'm not sure, completely understood what Child Find was, but she basically went at it as she gets her students kind of on her caseload due to what classes she's assigned to, and that's done by her supervising teacher. What are the greatest challenges in regards to special education? So the administrator works in a building that has a functional learning center and some students that have some pretty high therapeutic needs. But I think with some challenges with not always having uniform systems and resources and structures, a lot of the students that we're starting to see have high therapeutic needs, and the school setting maybe isn't equipped to deal with those needs and behaviors. And so not having the resources and structures yet, still having to provide that piece of education has been somewhat of a struggle, I would say, that's increased in the last few years. The teacher, I think this is probably par for the course with most teachers, that the time and resources as well as staff. This specific teacher, like I mentioned, is in a life skills program and with a lot of individualized instruction. And so I think time-wise for her isn't that she has a curriculum that she gets to plan out of, but she's doing and creating a lot of that on her own time out of her own ideas. So that can be a challenge, I think. And then the paraprofessional, it was sweet. I think the technology piece is always a struggle no matter when you're dealing with kids in school. And then she also shared that sometimes the regular education teachers don't always have a full understanding of why the accommodations or modifications are needed for students. So the most rewarding parts of our job. So I think this was one of them that they all probably shared a pretty similar answer. So the administrator said breakthroughs. And then also building those relationships with students despite everything they're bringing on a daily basis, despite all the challenges that they have, is working to build those relationships with students and their families. And then the teacher said having students make progress over the years, seeing behaviors decrease because of supports that have been put into place for those students. And lastly, the paraprofessional, just seeing kids be successful. So I think that was a pretty common theme through all of the people that I talked with. It was just success, having your students find great success. So supervision. So what advice do you have for supervision of special education staff? So the administrator talked a little bit about the hierarchy of the school and how each person needs to be supervised and go to the person that directly that evaluates them. So their direct supervisor would be that person that does their evaluation, and that kind of needs to follow the chain of command. The administrators, like for a para, are really there to consult. They can help address concerns as needed, but like a para's direct supervisor would be the overseeing special education teacher, so whoever has that direct supervision. The teacher shared that she would take as much and would always appreciate training and more training on supervision. I think that's one of those things that as you grow in your career maybe gets easier with experience, but can be a really difficult thing to manage. And then the para just shared that her supervising teacher advises her on how to work with individual students with different strategies and ideas. So working to be effective, how do we work to effectively work with not only the students, but the parents? So the administrator kind of cut this into two categories, LD or the learning disabled category. The case manager, that teacher really is the first line of support and have that rapport and communication with the parent. And they're kind of there as a consult person to add support and ideas as needed. In the functional area that she works with, those students have more hurdles. They come with a bigger list of needs. And so the principals a lot of times are on the first line of communication with parents and approaching those relationships. The teacher shared, I think she does a pretty fabulous job of communicating with parents. I think that's maybe one of her strong points that other people sometimes shy away from, but she's really does a nice job with it. And just shared, building that trust, building that communication, asking the parent. A lot of times we forget to ask the parent on what they're seeing at home and what's working with them at home. And then the paraprofessional just shared that most of the communication with parents normally goes through the case manager, mainly because of confidentiality, and they just have that relationship a little bit more than the paras do. So how do you form a working relationship with regular education teachers with a special needs student involved? The administrator shared that she thought that the special education teachers work really well with the regular education teachers, and that communication is really a two-way street, that the regular ed teachers do a nice job of asking for clarification as needed. It's just a matter of sometime making sure we're both on the same page. The teacher shared that in the position she's in, that email's a big piece of her communication with the general education teachers, and that Google Classroom has really been a useful tool to help her students, as well as her and her staff, know what's going on with students in other classrooms. And then the para shared just trying to touch base with the teacher at the beginning of every class, modifying assignments as much as possible for the day, and they're usually good at already knowing that some of the things that each of the students will need in that classroom. So what advice do you have for a first-year administrator? My assistant principal shared, ask questions. And I think that's a great one that I think would just come naturally for most people, that there would be a lot of gaps that would need to be filled. The other thing she said was to know the building coordinator. So in this district, there's actually a special education quote-unquote coordinator that's an administrator over a couple buildings and is really the go-to person for special education needs. The teacher shared for special education students that they're just as much the administrators as they are the case managers, and that they really hope that administrator works to form a relationship and a bond with those students and get to know those students, to really be a support to each other. And then the paraprofessional would say that they would appreciate it if they understood their point of view and their job, and trust that they're going to do what's right for students on an individual level. So describe the role of the special education teacher and building administrator. So this, the administrator took it as kind of an overall, hey, we're all advocates. We're advocating for what's best for this student. The teacher said that the principal should know the SPED programs and what should be going on in each of those programs. And they're kind of that SPED teacher's first line of call or, line up of questions or that type of thing. And the paraprofessional broke this into two categories. She looked at her teacher as someone that she could consult with that would help organize and schedule not only the paras but the students. And that for a principal, she would want someone that's in tune with trainings and getting them the information that they would need kind of to be able to function within the school, or to get that to their department head. So characteristics of an administrator, or someone aspiring to be an administrator in regards to special ed. The administrator said you got to sometimes have thick skin. Sometimes there's hard situations that you deal with special needs students, and you got to be able to thicken up and to say and bring some hard things to the table, but talk through them and be supportive at the same time. Start each day new. I think when we talked, that was more in regards to working with students. You've got to be able to start over. Some kids just have a bad day and it seems like it's every day, but you got to be able to start the day new with them. And then to definitely let people know that you don't have all the answers. Be honest, learn together. The special education is such a broad category with so many kids needing so many things that are individualized that sometimes we don't have the answers, and it's okay to let people know that and to know that we're all learning together. The teacher shared that she would want someone who is supportive and that sees the special education department as an equal piece of the school. And then the paraprofessional would just want an administrator that could step into the student's shoes and understand their point, that maybe loves their job and really wants to know the students and have a relationship with those students. So very student focused. So my personal reflection after visiting with these three people was definitely that I think maybe there were some more in-depth answers with the administrator and the teacher. Maybe the para had great insight, maybe not as in-depth answers or understanding of some of the questions or some of the technicalities. Very impressed though that I thought she was extremely student focused, and you could tell just by talking with her that she really had the kids' best interest at heart. So thanks, and have a good night.